Arrogant judge humiliates elderly truck driver without knowing he is a genius. On that sultry Wednesday morning, the municipal forum of Saint-Geronimo-du-Vale was particularly busy. It was one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone, including the judge. And there, between anxious faces and restrained whispers, Elias Rocha entered, a 71-year-old man in shabby jeans, a plaid button-down shirt, and a faded trucker's cap with the words, "On the road since 1978. His steps were slow but steady. No one looked twice at him. He looked like one of those men from the countryside who barely know how to sign his name. But those who really knew him knew. Elijah was not just anyone. Before taking the wheel of a truck and traveling around Brazil, transporting dreams and goods, he had been a lawyer for almost 30 years, specializing in constitutional law. He dropped everything after the death of his wife and the bankruptcy of his old office. He found peace on the asphalt and dignity in anonymity. What got him to court? A mistake. A fine for evading tolls in a region where he had not even passed. A simple administrative error that could be solved online. But Elijah, true to his principles, chose to resolve it himself. If I want my grandchildren to trust the justice, I need to show that it is made up of people who look you in the eye, she told her daughter before leaving home. But the judge in the case was not just anyone. Dr. Walter Mendonça, a figure feared for his harsh posture and his reputation for humiliating those who dared to challenge him. In the corridors of the forum, it was known as the Iron Hammer of the Interior. And that morning, he didn't expect to be challenged, especially by a truck driver. When Elias entered the courtroom, he sat quietly in the dock reserved for the defendants. The judge, already irritated by the delay of the agenda, did not even look up. He only announced with disdain, "Case 2934, fine for evasion. Defendant present?" Elijah stood up calmly. He leaned on his polished wooden cane and replied, "Present, Your Honor. But allow me, before proceeding, to correct the term. I am not a defendant. I am a citizen." There was a brief silence. A murmur began to spread among those present. The judge frowned and looked for the first time directly at Elijah. "Are you a lawyer now, truck driver?" Elias took a deep breath, slowly took a leather wallet from his back pocket, and held up a document he had kept out of respect, not vanity. "I was a lawyer for almost 3 decades. And before being anything, I am a Brazilian with the right to dignity, even if I enter here with a cap and calluses on my hands." The referee hit the gavel hard. Contempt. A $1,000 fine. But it was too late. A young man in the audience was already recording the scene discreetly with his cell phone. And what was supposed to be just another routine hearing in a forgotten forum was about to become a historic turning point. A clash between institutional power and the simple but unshakable voice of a man who knew the road and the Constitution by heart. If you want, I can continue with the next topic. Underrated protagonist with unexpected past. Do you want to go with him? Perfect. Let's then move on to the second topic, now detailed in the form of a narrative, maintaining the emotional elements and triggers that sustain viralization. The courtroom was still reverberating with the impact of Elias's words when Judge Walter Mendonça, with his brow furrowed and his fingers clenched in the hammer, rose slightly in his chair. "Do you think you can come here to this court and teach me about law?" Elias's response came without arrogance, just with the firmness of someone who has seen it all, from forums in Brasilia to truck drivers sleeping on the side of the road in fear of robbery. "I did not come to teach, Your Honor. I came to remember." The judge was silent for a moment. This was not a direct disrespect. It was something more dangerous. Legitimate authority without uniform. That's when the judge's assistant, still trying to keep her composure, whispered something in his ear. A note had been passed discreetly by a younger employee, an intern at the forum who, upon hearing Elias's full name, had a snap. He has already played here. 90s. He was a defense lawyer, won 3 lawsuits against the state itself. He has published a book on fundamental rights. The judge turned pale for a second. Then he realized that at that moment, he was not facing a functional illiterate, as he had perhaps assumed. I was facing a man who knew more about the system than many of those who wore toga there. But Walter Mendonça was too vain to back down. He turned to the audience, trying to maintain control of the narrative. This court will not be the stage for populist speeches. You are here for toll evasion. We are not debating judicial ethics or the history of law. Elijah slowly raised his head, his eyes full of firmness and accumulated weariness. With all due respect, Your Honor, when a judge humiliates a father of a family, a young man without a lawyer, or an old truck driver who just wants to be heard, what is practiced here is not justice. It's a spectacle. And if it is to be staged, let it be with the audience watching. The words hit the walls of the courtroom hard. By then, the cell phones were already on. Local journalists covering routine cases felt something was different. What was supposed to be another fine turned into a clash of generations, classes, and knowledge. That morning, the country got to know Elias Rocha, not as the old man in the truck, but as the man who reminded the justice that knowledge and dignity do not depend on recent suits or titles. And outside, in a roadside tire shop, a fellow truck driver sent the first message that would soon become a viral meme. Judge tried to run over the old man, but he forgot that he ran the law for years. Ready to move on to the third topic? It brings the cinematic elements and the escalation of visual tension. Can I continue? Wonderful. We will then develop the third topic with the same cinematic care that made the previous narrative go viral. The clock on the wall was 10:18 a.m. when Judge Walter Mendonça hit the gavel hard for the second time. But it was not the dry sound of the impact that silenced the court. It was the atmosphere of anticipation, heavy as fog about to turn into a storm. Elias Rocha, standing, held his cane in his left hand and an envelope with documents in the other. His broad shoulders no longer had the vigor of youth, but his posture was impeccable. The sunlight that came in through the side window discreetly made the buckle of his belt discreetly shine, where it was engraved in brass. Respect is the heaviest load I have ever carried. The judge's eyes sought to intimidate him, but Elias did not back down, and the entire court felt it. A young mother with her son sleeping on her lap in the back seat stopped rocking the baby. The legal intern, who usually typed non-stop, didn't dare touch the keyboard. Even the bailiff leaning against the wall stopped crossing his arms, as if recognizing that he was facing something that was not seen every day. The judge, trying to maintain authority, mechanically recited, "Mr. Elias Rocha, this court is not a place for challenges. If he does not withdraw or retreat from his position, I will apply a new sanction." Elijah then stepped forward. Only one, but it was enough to change the atmosphere. He placed the envelope on the table in front of him, turned on his side and looked straight into the judge's eyes. Without fear, without anger, just with that calm steadfastness that can only be acquired with years of road and life lived. "Your Honor, you can apply all the sanctions that the toga allows, but I ask you to read this document first. Not by me, but for all the young people who have already left this court thinking that justice is synonymous with humiliation." A local reporter's camera captured this exact moment. The click froze the image. Elias standing, the envelope on the table, the judge motionless in his chair, and in the background, a row of attentive eyes, of people who, for the first time, were not just watching, they were feeling. Hours later, this photo would circulate on social networks with the caption, "He faced the judge with an envelope," and a silence that spoke louder than any sentence. And so, the country started to follow no longer one case of traffic violation, but a clash, worthy of an award-winning court script. The difference? It was real, it was happening, and the people were on Elijah's side. When Judge Walter Mendonça threatened Elias for the third time with a fine for contempt, expecting a reaction of submission, he was surprised by the calmest and most devastating response of the day. Elias, without changing his tone of voice, said with his eyes fixed on the magistrate, "Contempt is not raising your voice, it is lowering one's eyes in the face of injustice." The phrase reverberated in the courtroom like deaf thunder. A reporter wrote it down immediately. A law student in the audience typed on her cell phone and posted it on X, formerly Twitter. The post went viral in minutes, shared with the caption, "A truck driver teaching the judge the true meaning of the word respect." Hashtags, Justiça humiliates, Voz da Estrada. But Elias did not stop there. When accused of making a populist speech, he replied, "A populist is someone who applies the law as if it were punishment, not guidance. I know the road. I know where there are holes and where there is a bridge." The referee tried to interrupt, but Elias continued firmly, "Old doesn't mean ignorant, and truck driver does not mean idiot. I have already sat on the side of the law. Today I sit on the side of the road. And I know that on both sides there are people being run over by vanity." The judge's assistant lowered her eyes. The audience held the air. And there, at that moment, Elijah did not speak only for himself. He spoke for all those who never had the courage or opportunity to speak up. On the way out of the courtroom, surrounded by journalists, he summed it all up with a phrase that made headlines the next day. "Justice should not humiliate, it must guide. Because whoever hits the hammer forgets, but whoever takes the beating carries it for the rest of his life." The latter even became a t-shirt print seen days later in the protests outside the São Geronimo de Vale courthouse. And so without shouting, without threatening, Elias Rocha conquered what many try by force, the sincere attention of the people. Because his words didn't come from strategy, they came from his chest. On the afternoon of that same day, the video of the clash between Elias Rocha and Judge Walter Mendonça had already exceeded 500,000 views. Recorded with a simple cell phone. The audio sometimes failed, but what was not lost was the essence of that moment. A simple, elderly man, facing with courage what many only face in silence. The hashtags Yaudri Justiça, Comalias, and Ani Voz da Estrada entered the national trending topics. Profiles of truck drivers, law students, activists, and even retired magistrates began to share the video with supportive comments. "My father went through this in 2009. He never had the courage to react. Thank you, Elias. He spoke for all of us who were once judged before we even opened our mouths." In São Geronimo de Vale, people who had never set foot in a forum began to appear at the door of the court with improvised posters. "Justice is not ego, the truck that ran over the silence." Thank you, Elias. But what really made the movement take shape was the emergence of new reports. One by one, residents of the region began to send anonymous messages, audios, emails, and videos. A 19-year-old fined for disrespect while trying to explain his case. A single mother who lost temporary custody of her daughter for arrogant attitude when speaking firmly. A man who spent 30 days in prison for contempt after asking to use the bathroom during the hearing. And then, the first former employee of the forum spoke out. In a private message to a local journalist, he said, "Judge Walter used the court as if it were his backyard. Those who contested were fined. Those who kept silent were ignored. He only got angry now because for the first time, someone knew the way back." The complaints began to organize. A public defense attorney in another state launched a website, Transparent Court, where anyone could report judicial abuses. In 2 days, the Forum of São Geronimo was the one that had the most entries. Elias's communication team, improvised, made up of his daughter, a teenage grandson, and the owner of the local tire shop, began to receive invitations from radios, podcasts, and TV programs. But Elijah was not interested in fame. He only said, "I don't speak for myself, I speak for everyone who has never been heard. But if they want to listen now, then let's talk." And they talked. The whole of Brazil. What started as a toll system, error has become the fuse of one of the biggest conversations about abuse of judicial authority in the country's small towns. Elijah's road had no return, and he knew. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, a country that was finally beginning to pay attention. As the story spread throughout Brazil, many people began to wonder, who is Elias Rocha, and The more they discovered, the more they fell in love with the simple, human, and profoundly true figure of that man, who, at the age of 71, was still crossing the country driving a 1979 Mercedes truck, affectionately nicknamed Donacita, in honor of his late wife. Elias did not seek the spotlight. He continued with his humble routine. He woke up early, drank coffee brewed through a cloth strainer, read the printed newspapers he collected carefully, and made notes in a black-covered notebook with the inscription, "Learnings from the Road." He didn't need a rehearsed speech. His life was the argument itself. During an interview for a radio station in the countryside, he was asked, "Do you see yourself as a hero, Mr. Elias?" He laughed, a low, almost shy laugh, and replied, "A hero is the one who wakes up early to try to change someone's day. I only said what Brazil is silent about." The response went around the country, and in the following days, videos emerged of truck drivers stopping at gas stations to watch Elias's interviews together. In public schools, teachers used the video of the hearing as an example of active citizenship. Law students began to cite him in works on legal ethics. People sent letters to the tire shop where he did maintenance, with phrases like, "You reminded me that there is still hope. You spoke calmly what I could only shout inside. You are my grandfather, my father, my neighbor. Thank you." But what moved her the most was the account that appeared on a social network, written by her 14-year-old granddaughter. "My grandfather has always been a giant to me, but to see Brazil see this too made me cry with pride. He taught me to drive and never accept injustice, neither in traffic nor in life." Elias unintentionally became a symbol. Not because it is perfect, but precisely because it is real. He sweated when he spoke, swallowed hard when he remembered his wife, fumbled with technology, but when he opened his mouth about justice, respect, and freedom, it was like listening to the deepest and most legitimate Brazil. And so, a truck driver who drove alone came to be accompanied by an entire country, not as a political leader, but as a representative of what the people are when they refuse to lower their heads. The video was less than 3 minutes long. It was shaky, poorly framed with imperfect audio, but too powerful to ignore. In one scene, Elias Rocha, standing in the courtroom, faces the judge with serenity and says, "The toga protects, but it should not hide. The hammer imposes, but it should not be silent." Those seconds became a clip, then meme, then soundtrack videos on TikTok with voiceover narration, emotional background music, uppercase subtitles, and vintage film filters. Brazil didn't just see Elias, it started to feel him. Meanwhile, in the real world, the impact was also taking shape. The day after the hearing, 2 ladies from the evangelical community arrived at the forum with flowers and a banner. "Respect has no age, no position. We are with Elijah." On the 3rd day, there were already truck drivers parking their vehicles in the vicinity. Some came from other cities. One of them, with tears in his eyes, told local TV, "He spoke like us, with the heart." And the judge wanted to tell him to shut up. It won't shut up. We came to show that. Posters appeared. Justice is a two-way street. Whoever hits the gavel, listen to what is being preached. Mr. Elias, you don't walk alone. Programs such as Fantástico, Encontro, and Profissão Reporter began to mention the case. Articles with the title, "The Truck Driver Who Stopped the Judicial System," invaded the news portals. International newspapers such as The Guardian and El País translated the story to show a deeply human Brazil. Experts, law professors, and former magistrates began to comment on the video with analyses of the judge's posture, the power of the citizen, and the symbolic value of Elias. Humor pages created memes. Education pages created debates. Activism pages created campaigns. Elijah never asked for that, but his simple truth was so powerful that people wanted to carry it with him. A truck driver from Pernambuco posted, "I've been on the road for 18 years. I've been humiliated in a checkpoint, in a forum, in a hospital waiting room. To see Elias standing, it made me want to walk another 18, because now I know that I don't walk alone." And that's what exploded. Collective recognition. It was no longer about a video nor about a judge. It was about a people who finally saw someone like themselves heard and respected. 2 weeks after the hearing, the São Jerónimo do Vale Forum was no longer the same. What was once a drab building ignored by most was now surrounded by cameras, posters, and voices. But Elias Rocha was not there. He had returned home, in the interior of Minas Gerais, where he still took care of the tools of the old Mercedes Dona Cida, and had coffee with his neighbors. But even in silence, he was still present. In every debate, in every bill, in every denunciation that finally came to light. The video of the hearing was used as the main evidence in a petition filed with the Internal Affairs Office of the Court of Justice. Days later, Judge Walter Mendonça was placed under temporary suspension for conduct incompatible with public service. The State Legal Commission announced a full investigation into his last 15 years of operation. More than 120 reports from former defendants, lawyers, and civil servants began to be gathered in a dossier. Many of them, until then, were afraid to speak. But now they said, if Elijah had the courage, so can I. Inspired by the movement, state deputies proposed the creation of a program called Justice for All, focusing on monitoring abuses in small-town forums, where silence usually reigns. But it was Elias's grandson, Vinicius, who had the idea that most moved the country. Create the Estrada Justa Project, a civic education initiative for truck drivers, street vendors, farmers, and small workers, with simple videos, itinerant meetings, and booklets on basic rights. At the launch, Elias appeared, in a cap, denim, shirt, and with the same black notebook. He went on stage, looked at the audience, and said, "The road teaches what books sometimes forget. We need to listen to each other. Justice is not to be silent, it's to talk." In Congress, a proposal began. To gain strength, the Elias Rocha Project, which provided for the creation of community commissions to oversee municipal forums, composed of former public defenders, community leaders, and ordinary citizens. With popular support and media coverage, the bill was approved with a unanimous vote in the Senate. Months later, a mural was painted on a side wall of the bus station in Belo Horizonte. It showed Elias standing with his hand on the steering wheel of Dona Cida, and the sky in the background transformed into a scale of justice. Below, a sentence in large letters: "If even the truck driver was heard, all of Xixi, Brazil can be." And so the man who entered a forum to question a fine went down in history as a symbol of social transformation. Not with shouting, not with hatred, but with firmness, truth, and the weight of the road that carries not only burdens, but consciences. Elias Rocha did not enter that court to make history. He came in to correct a mistake, but by refusing to lower his eyes in the face of injustice, he ended up raising the head of an entire country. Because sometimes, the one who moves the world is not the one who screams the loudest. It is the one who remains standing when silence tries to crush it. It doesn't matter if you wear a toga, uniform, badge, or cap. The right to dignity is non-negotiable. And when an ordinary person, with calloused hands and a serene voice, dares to say, "That's not right," true justice begins, not with letterhead, but with courage. If this story touched you, share it. But not only that, exhibitions, commente, greet, eduque, fiscalize, issue. Because every small forum has its Elias. All that's missing is an audience, willing to listen. And if you think that one person alone doesn't change the system, remember a truck driver who, with an envelope and a firm silence, stopped authoritarianism in the middle of the court. Now it's up to you. The road is open. The question is, are you just going to watch or are you going to drive together?